Hey guys, welcome to another tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to create grungy organic type text. So before we dive into it, let's have a look at what we'll be creating. There you go, a text with some glittery bits, lots of cracks, erosion around it, and some random leaves and some moss and all that type of stuff, and of course these, well, I suppose magical particles. Right, so let's see how we will create this. So I've got here the finished composition. I will, by the way, make this available for download as well. In any case, right, so high level, what we're doing here is we're starting with the text plus tool. We're adding a bunch of stuff to that, but it remains 2D at this point in time. But then we feed it into a image plane to bring it into 3D space. Then we bring in the camera via merge tool, and we bring in a little particle system. We bring in a background and a background in 3D, so it's just a plane behind it. Then we add a couple of lights, and finally we will render it out. One thing to notice here is that we will be making use of the software renderer because of the fact that we wanted to have soft shadows. Unfortunately, the OpenGL renderer in Fusion 8 does not support soft shadows. There are ways to fake it, but in this particular case, I just used the software renderer. And then ultimately we will save it out into a saver. Right, so, but let's have a bit of a closer look at the 2D aspects, because this will be the majority of the time we'll be spending on. Right, so we start with a text plus tool, and we will be feeding in the background. So let's have a look at that. So let's display this in 1 and 2. Right, as you can see, there's a bit of a difference here between the sort of middle and the edge. That's because there's an outline. We will make use of the same texture, but because I did the mapping somewhat differently, there's a bit of an outline. Right. Then next one up, we're going to create the outside erosion. Right, so in this particular case, we're only affecting the outside. And then the next one up, we're creating the cracks within the text. Now, I wanted to keep these separate to have control over these separately. So for instance, if you go here to the gaps, so that's a fast noise tool, and then play with the detail, you can see here we're just affecting the middle, whereas if you play with the edge erosion, another fast noise tool, you are just changing the outside. Right, so you could do this all in one node, but then you basically lose your separate control. Next one up, is the discoloring of the edges of the inside erosion. Right, as you can see here, let's show this. Sorry, without and with. It's a very subtle difference, but it is there. It may not be that apparent on YouTube. Next one up is the sparkles. Right, and again, this is a fast noise tool put on top of the text, and then we add some moss in here, and then ultimately the leaves. Right, so this is all accomplished by using mostly channel booleans and merge tools. So in the tutorial I'll be explaining a bit about those tools. So having said all of that, let's dive into it. Let's create a new composition, and let's start. Let's start by pulling in, dragging in the resources, the assets we'll need. So we have a red rock type picture, a background picture, and some leaves. By the way, when I drag these in, I hold the shift key, because otherwise, when you've got these numbered images, it can interpret them as image sequences, and then it all of a sudden pulls in a whole lot of images you don't want to have, right? So shift drag, that does the trick. So let's create a text plus text plus. Right, let's view it in this viewport, create our text. choose the right font, well, the right font as in for our purposes here, but of course you can use whatever font you want to go for. I'm going for this one, this particular case. Oops, size it up a bit. Oh, and even a bit more, something like this. Right, so we are going to pipe this into this node, but not into the effect mask. We want to drag it in or pipe it in as an image. So first thing we need to do is go into the shading tab and ensure that the first shader is set to image. Now this will come up. You can sort of either drag the node into this or just pipe it into the image input for shader 1. There we go. Similarly, for the second shader, which is a standard set as an outline, let's enable that. Standard, it just has a red outline. Of course, we want to change that to an image. So let's change it to image. And again, do the same thing. We will drag in or pipe in the same input. Let's increase the thickness somewhat. And let's work on, let's use this, stretch to fit. You can do all kinds of stuff, but I want to actually do something more here. I want to play with this picture a bit. I first of all want to change the scaling a bit, so I put in a transform node in between and play a bit with this. Scale it up a bit, maybe something like this. I want to also make it a bit more dramatic, so I'm going to add in a color corrector. Now, for those people that are very much into compositing and such, may have seen a flaw in my workflow. I don't have the LUT enabled, which means really I'm not using a linear workflow. I'm not going to go into that in this tutorial, but you can look up various online resources on what it means going for a linear workflow. But for the purposes here, this is fine, but I realize there's a bit of a flaw in it. All right, so let's add a bit of contrast, tiny bit of contrast, and let's leave it like this for now. But of course, we can always revise it later on. So let's go to the interesting bits. Let's add in a channel boolean. All right, so what we want to do here is basically create the erosion outside here. So how we're going to do that? All right, we first want to create sort of that erosion. Now, what I typically do is use a fast noise tool. I use these tools all the time and pipe that into the foreground of the channel boolean. So we've got the background going in here and the foreground. Right now nothing happens. Oh, sorry, let's display that here. Right now the standard will happen. It will do a copy operation and copy the foreground basically into everything. But before we start changing this, let's play with the noise a tiny bit. So let's bring in some contrast, brightness, and really change the scale, maybe to something like 80. Some more detail, actually, maybe it is a bit bright. Let's keep it like this for now, and go back to the channel booleans and show that. Sorry, that was already shown. Let's now play with this. What I'm going to do is basically say, okay, I want to subtract the alpha of this image, the fast noise, from the text. So that basically I'm cutting out holes. So I'm going to subtract. And what it does now is it works with the foreground, green, blue, and alpha, but I just want to do it with the alpha for everything. So I'm changing this to alpha, alpha, and alpha. And that's basically the result for now. This is a bit dramatic, but of course we said we want to just restrict it to the edges. So how do we do this? Right? Well, we'll do this by simply sort of masking out certain bits, right? The inside of the text. So what we essentially can do is pipe in the text tool into another tool to create a type of mask. And that's what we'll be doing. So let's create a, or pull in an erode node, put it here, pipe this into it, and let's display it here, right? As standard, nothing happens because we're not eroding anything yet. But if we're now doing this, right, you can see it's getting smaller. Don't worry about the colors and everything, that's not of any importance right now. So now we've got basically a smaller version of the text. So if we have this, then all we need to do basically say, okay, well, that's great, but how do we get this into a mask so that it only basically affects the outside? Well, what we can do is the following. Add in a bitmap node. Oops, not like this. Pipe this into the bitmap. Look at this. So it creates a mask out of this. But then we can invert it. So now we're basically saying, okay, wherever you see the white, that's where when you pipe this into the effect mask, then where there is white, the underlying or the fast noise will be working. Right? You will see the effect there and only there. Where there's black, i.e. the rest of the text, the effect will not be visible. And the result you can see here, right? You see the holes here, but not in the middle. So let's, for now, again, remove this and see the difference. So here it's affecting everything. Here it's just affecting the outside. And now you can play with the erode and with the amount. And as you can see, you can change in terms of how much of the outside is being affected. So I think this looks pretty good. And of course, how it will be affected, you can then vary by changing, for instance, the scaling or contrast. You can do all sorts of stuff. So just tweak it to your liking. So this is already starting to look pretty good, even if I say so myself. Right, if we want to see it on a black background, let's do this. Actually, looking at it again. Maybe that's a bit too much. Maybe. Actually, I quite like this. Okay, let's keep it like this. So let's start working on the inside. Let's add in another channel booleans. Right, like so. Add another fast noise. Like so. And let's first work on the fast noise. Because basically what I want to do is I want to create some cracks rather than holes. Right, subtle difference, I suppose. So I'm going to work with the discontinuous noise pattern. Crank the detail up to maybe something like 20. I want to have some more contrast. And actually let's invert it. And I want to add some brightness, maybe even 1.5. And then really start working with the scale. So let's scale it up to 20. Yeah. Maybe increase the brightness a bit more to maybe 9. Yeah, this is sort of, you can see that these can become nice cracks in the text. So let's pipe these, or let's pipe the fast noise into the foreground. Right, and let's do the same thing here. We're going to subtract the alpha of the various channels. So first do alpha foreground. Oh, that's fine. Alpha, alpha, and alpha. Oh, sorry, I'm not actually displaying it. There we go. That's the result. And so you can see here some nice cracks going on. Of course, if we want to vary these, right, we just need to work with this. Right, they become bigger like this. Change the brightness. Now change it to your heart's content. Let's go for something relatively subtle. As subtle as grungy text can be, of course. Yeah, I think this looks pretty good. Next one up then is discoloring the edges. We're going to use the fast noise tool also to create the discoloring around the edges. Right, so let's first create a background tool that will basically determine the color of the discoloring, or the discoloring rather. So let's go for something like this, rather dark, and then we pipe this into the mask input there, and then you get this, right? So this already, let's add a merge tool here, and let's pipe this there, right? The effect is, of course, well, first of all, it will be everywhere. What we need to do first is change the operator mode in a merge node to a top, so that it will only be affecting the things on top of the text. Now, issue here, of course, is it is wherever you would see the discoloring, you've got the cracks, so it's largely disappearing, right? So if you switch this off and on, there is some discolorization, but not much. So what I want to do is basically expand the background here. So expand it here. So what I can do here is add a bitmap. Sorry, pop it in between here, right? And then after that, add a mat control and pop it in between that. Right, and now we will have more ability to control the discolorization here. So watch what happens here, and let's expand it. Right, you can see that it is discoloring more around here, so maybe a bit less blur. Hopefully that will be visible on YouTube, but essentially by expanding it, you're expanding the white here, and that will determine where the background color will be, i.e. the discolorization. Right, so maybe this is a bit overly dramatic, maybe something like this, subtle, and we can even add a bit of transparency in there, in the color itself, so we end up with something like this. Okay, so let's go to the next step. The next step will be adding the little sparkles. So let's add another merge tool. Let's add in a fast noise tool to create our little sparkles. Always be careful when you pipe this in here, that you pipe it into the right input, right? Not into the mask input, but into the foreground input. Well, you see this happening straight away. Of course, this is not what we want, so we need to play with the parameters. So I want to have a lot of detail. I really need to scale this up to probably something like 80. Right, going to, there we go. So I may need to speed this up in the video so that you guys don't get overly bored. Yeah, maybe something like this. Color-wise, I'm going to go for a bit of very light yellowish. Give it a maybe a bit more. Right, and then give it a bit of soft glow. Right. Next thing we need to do is animate it a bit, and that's very simple. We're just going to add a bit of the seed rate so that you have some animation over time. So let's do a little bit of a preview for a few frames, and let's see what it looks like. Okay, for now that looks okay. We may need to come back and tweak it later on. let's leave it like this for now. Okay, so next one up is the moss, and that's going to be a very simple one. So another merge node, set the mode again to a top. Of course, yet again a fast noise tool, and pipe that into the foreground and zoom in a bit. Let's display the noise here, merge there, and let's play around again. So first of all, let's change the color of the second color. Make it a sort of a greeny type color. Of course, this is way over the top, so let's play with this again, scale it up more, maybe something like this. That's too much. Maybe something like this. All right, so last one up before we take it into 3D is our final merge node. All right, pipe this in here. Get the leaves in, right? So we had the leaves somewhere up there, right? Let's first get in a transform tool. Add it in there. Let's show that here. Right, so this is very, very simple, but it's okay for our purposes here. Of course, you can get incredibly fancy with this this type of vegetation. You can make it really beautiful and everything, but for now I kept it really simple. I think I had about 4 leaves that I sort of copied over in various places in this background. So yeah, let's display this here. Obviously this is not quite right, so we need to play with the transform tool. Let's scale down a bit, bring it down a bit, right? So that is looking okay-ish, maybe just a tiny bit bigger, and get it up a bit. Thing is, I don't want this to be everywhere, right? I don't want this to be here, so again I could do a top, right? And that works. However, if you want to have the leaves to sometimes, come over the edges a bit, you need to have a bit of a different approach, right? So let's change it back to over, right? So another way of basically getting rid of this is of course by piping in the output of the merge tool into the mask input. Right? Same result, really, because you're basically saying, I want this to be on top, but only where you've got the mask, and it's basically the text itself. So it's essentially the same as the top. However, what I can do now is bring in our friend, the matte control, and pop that sort of in between there. So let's unhook this, pipe this into the matte control, and then pipe it back in here. And now we can basically play around with this, right? We can expand it, add a bit of blur, and expand it maybe to, as you can see here, right? Without it's, oh, maybe this is a better example. You see it everywhere, and then here it is being cut out, but you still have a bit of the leaf extruding or going over the edges of the text. So that's really what we were looking for. Right, so apart from maybe some final color correction here, we would be done. So let's quickly add in a bit of color correction to make it blend together a bit better. So really all I want to do is bring the saturation down a bit. Just a bit, something like this, right? Looking pretty good. So that's the first part done. This was the hardest bit. Now we're going to do pretty standard stuff, right? We're going to pipe the whole thing into an image plane 3D. Bang, let's display that. And there we go. Now we've got our text in 3D and we can navigate around and everything. Right, so that is looking good. Let's add a merge node. Oh, of course, a merge 3D. There we go. Pipe this in here, pipe this in there. Let's add a camera. Pipe it in here. And we're not going to really position the camera at the moment. Let's play with that later on. Let's first focus on getting the elements right and then worry about the movement later on. Next thing we want to do, of course, is to bring in our final asset, which is over here, right over here. Bring it in here. Bring it in here. There we go. So that's the background. So I want to basically add this to an image plane as well. So let's first add that image plane. Right, and pipe it in there. Let's just view it in here. Right. So I want to bring this into the merge node as well. And now they occupy the same space, but of course they're in the same Z position, so we need to change that. So let's pull this back. So let's go here and pop it right over there. And then of course we need to really increase the scale of it. Right, maybe even a bit more, something like 8. Right. So that's the first thing. So we want to make it a bit more interesting by essentially introducing a bump map and apply some color correction. So let's first do the color correction, right? Going to be very simple color corrector. And let's display that here. And let's again tone down the saturation somewhat. Maybe something like this. Then I'll pump this into a blend tool, like so. And there we've got a bump map material input, but we first need to create a bump map out of this. And I'm not going to go overly fancy because it's a really subtle effect. I'm going to add in a bump map tool. Oops, sorry, and I'll pipe it in here, and you can see the results here. It doesn't do anything right now until you bump it into this, into the bump map material. Now, as such, you won't see an awful lot yet. And if we zoom in here, whether or not I have the bump map, I can disable it. You don't really see the difference there. Reason is we don't have a light yet. So let's first add a light in. Right, so light, and let's take a spotlight and pipe that in here. Let's zoom out again and let's position our spotlight like so. Of course, we need to switch on the lights in the view, right, as you can see here. Right, we will need to fix a few things later on in terms of the text and the specularity, but let's first focus on the background. First off, the light itself. Let's play with the angle a bit. And this angle. Maybe something like this. Let's also add a tiny bit of ambient light. So let's bring that in. Like so. And there, and then really dial down the intensity. Maybe something like this. Right? And now, when we focus on the background, right, and we go to the bump map, which we disabled, and now enable it. Well, first of all, in the blend tool, itself. Let's tone down the specularity. This makes it really hard to see it. Okay, with this, go back to the bump map and then increase the height. Right, and there you see that things start happening. You see these roots start to sort of stick out a tiny bit. And that's the effect I was going to go for. So next one up, let's fix the text. Right, so we have the text here on the image plane. All we need to do really is go to the material, to the specularity, and tone that down. Maybe even to 0, maybe a tiny bit. I think this will be all right. Okay, so we're getting there. However, right, when we look at our original composition, right, so let's look at that again and show that here. Of course, it has this really nice glow. All it is really is basically the spotlight having a bit more of a yellow tone to it. So let's go to the spotlight and pick more of a yellow type color. Bang. Maybe this is a bit too much, so let's tone it down. Maybe something like this. Right, so this is getting very close to the example we had. Let's have a quick peek at the original one again. Of course, one of the main things here is the shadow. So let's go back to ours and let's fix that. All right, we don't see it right now. How come? Well, I think it is the positioning of the light. So let's play with that. There we go. There's our shadow, but of course, this is not a great shadow. And then that's what I said before, right? The OpenGL renderer, which is used in the viewport rendering, is not great at in all situations for shadows, right? So basically, it's casting the shadow of the overall image plane, and it's basically not looking at the transparency. So to see the result really properly, we need to add in a renderer and then enable the software renderer. So as to be able to do that, first of all, I want to have a proper camera position. Let's take this. And now what we can do, as we've done in previous tutorials, right click here at the bottom, copy point of view to the camera. Right, if we now switch to camera, it has basically taken the position of the perspective. And now when we add then a 3D renderer, right, and let's display that in viewport 1, then enable the lighting and the shadows, right, we see our shadow. So let's zoom in a bit here. Right, so we see the shadow, but it's still not as soft as I would want it to be. So let's go to the spotlight and let's go to the controls, and we have the shadows here, and let's add softness. There you go. Here you see already the softness. You can hardly see it, in fact. So if we want to increase the density of the shadow somewhat, we can do that, of course. Right. So again, if you want to change the position of the light and such, you just switch back to the perspective view and play around with it a bit. Right. So we need to go to our, where's our light gone? Here it is. And then we can play with it. Maybe something like this. Right, so we're actually nearly there. So of course we need to do two more things. One is getting the particles, and secondly the camera movement. So let's quickly do this. The particles are going to be very simple. So let's create a particle emitter and a renderer. Let's just view that here for now. What I want to do is basically change the emitter region to a cube and make that sufficiently large. So let's go here, change the width and the height and the depth, but actually it will need to be probably something like 3, 3, 3. Let's have a look here. How are we doing? No, wider than that. Let's make it 6. And it needs to be higher. 5. So now we're covering most of what we need to be covered. So what we want to do is basically create particles. So go to the controls, and we only want those to be generated in frame, the first frame. And let's make the number something like 250. We can change it later on, of course. Animate this, go 1 frame up, and bring it back to 0. Next thing we need to do is increase the lifespan, well, to whatever your composition length is going to be. Let's make that 1000. Well, actually, it's probably not going to be longer than 300, and let's change the composition length to 300. Oops, 300 as well. Right, so that is lined up. Now we need to work on the appearance of the particles. So let's go to the Style tab, change that to Blob. What you may need to do here is change the transparency to Quick Sort. Otherwise you can see really strange artifacts. And let's pipe this now into the merge tool, right? And you see them appearing here. So now they're here. You see these ugly shadows. Again, that same issue with OpenGL renderer, but you will see when we look at it in this in the renderer itself, it sorts itself out. There will be very soft shadows, but you can really hardly see them. So that looks pretty good, right? So let's go back to this view maybe, right? And copy this over to the camera. Right? And that looks pretty good. I want to have a bit of color in it, right? So, and I want the particles maybe to be a bit bigger. So let's go first of all back to the first frame. And oops, I had these the wrong way around. And let's go to the emitter, to the style and color. And I want them to be a bit yellowish, not too much. And add a bit of variation by adding a bit of red variance in there. So you get a bit of that orangey feel to it. And maybe now we can increase the size somewhat. Maybe that's a bit too much. The size variance. Right, so maybe we'll need to tweak the number of particles and the size, but let's work on the camera movement first, right? So let's go to the camera, which is over here. Of course, this is becoming a bit of a spaghetti type composition. So when you work like this later on, or whilst you're doing it, to tidy up the workflow a bit, I could have added another merge node here and another one. But for now, I just wanted to save a bit of time, right? So I do realize it's not the neatest of compositions. Having said that, let's go to the camera and let's create a very simple move. So we're going to animate the translate group, right click, animate translate group. I don't think I'm going to change the rotation, but just in case, animate the rotation group as well, which I could do, sorry, here, animate rotate group. And then essentially what we're doing is, if we want this to be the first frame, maybe this one, then we basically, again, copy this over and it will automatically create that keyframe. Then we move maybe 100 frames ahead and then zoom in to maybe something like this. Sometimes in the perspective view, the zooming is not very accurate. There must be a sort of a key modifier for that, but I haven't found out which one it is. So for now, I'm going to do it, zoom in a bit too much, create another keyframe by copying the position. Right, then I switch to the camera view, and I'm actually going to then tweak the offset, oops, to something I like. Maybe this. This looks like a good one. right? And it will automatically, of course, update the keyframe. So now, when we go back and start playing, we can see movement, right? Let's switch this off for now to make it a bit faster, to see what the movement will look like. Right, looking pretty good. The only thing I want to do now is go into the spline editor, enable the camera, select the keyframes and hit F, and that smoothens out. You could hit this button as well, the keyframes. You can tweak this, but for now I'll leave it as is. And if we then would play it again, you see it's sort of a much smoother movement, right? Again, OpenGL view is not great, but let's look at, actually, it is better in this particular case to switch the shadows off, right? It looks a lot better. But let's display this again. So switch the renderer on again with Control P, display it in viewport 1, go to frame 110 or whatever, and then you see the final frame. Of course, we want it to continue a bit so that you can see the sparkles moving. So very last thing we need to do is add a saver. And we'll give it a name, tutorial movie.mov. When you add the .mov, it will automatically update the output format to QuickTime. Again, this is just for our purposes here. QuickTime, of course, if you would need to deliver to a studio or whatever, you wouldn't choose this format in any case. It's all fun and games. Let's render this out and I'll be back in a moment to show you the final result. Now, it may be that we then need to tweak a few bits and bobs, but the majority has been done. I'll see you in a moment. Right, that's done. So let's have a look at the final result. And that looks pretty good. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Maybe these glitters could have been a bit more pronounced, but in any case, I hope you got the gist of this. And I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you've got any questions, comments whatsoever, please do leave them below the video. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. If you want to share this video, please do so by all means. And I'll see you next time. Take care, guys. Bye.